It's what I've always wanted to do, is just be a conduit for all kinds of strange and interesting things that people, generally speaking, don't know. And, you know, so many people in this country feel helpless. Well, it's because they are helpless, because they have no power, because knowledge is power. And so if you have no knowledge as to what's going on, you can't fix anything. So that's the big problem in America today. People have no idea in the world what's going on or how the trick works. And it is a trick. America is a very powerful country. And it didn't get that way by being kind and courteous. It got that way by, like, the British. The British Union Jack flag has the cross of St. Andrew, the crisscross, then it's got the cross of St. George on it. It's called the Union Jack flag. So you got two crosses. That's why they were called double crosses. The whole idea of the British have always been double crossing. They've always been lying, cheating, manipulating. It's an extraordinary story. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I talk about the British, I'm not talking about the English people. I love the people. But if I'm a white guy in, say, a black country in Africa, and I get thrown into jail, and I'm the only white guy in the jail, the first thing, the smart thing for me to do is get everybody fighting each other. So I tell one guy, you know what he said about your mother, and another guy, you know what he said about you, and before you know it, I've got everybody fighting each other. Good, let them kill each other and leave me alone. That's what England does. England gets everybody fighting each other. And then they come in and buy up the property and end up owning it all and do it all behind the scenes so that no one should ever know, and that's why they're a bunch of double crossers. And I, as an American, I'm just amazed at how the American people just fall all over themselves for the royalty and the prince and princess. You know, nobody likes to be talked down to and treated with disrespect. Nobody. You know, how many times would you want to be in the company of people who look at you like you're trash under their feet and won't even talk to you, have nothing to do with you? And yet, Americans love to crawl on their knees to see the Queen Mum as she rides by in her gold chariot and flips a cigarette out at you, you know, and her Prince Charles and all of these princes and princesses. And they live off of the sweat and the blood and the sweat of the working people, and people love it. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, we get what we pay for. We get what we want. People love to crawl on their knees to their masters and to important people, politicians. It's all business. You need to understand this, that all of life is considered commerce. Everything is business. Everything is based on commerce. And if you look up in a law dictionary, look up the word Congress, because we like to talk about the United States has a Congress. There's so much to tell you and so much to talk about, I don't even know where to start. But I do believe, I'm more interested in my personal life, I'm more interested in theology and religion. And the ancient world in relation to theology. But I realize that there is a very important need for people to understand how government works and how the laws work. Let me give you an example. We talked about this before. If you have a two-story building and you're going to put a lot of weight upstairs, like printing presses or whatever, the first thing to do is to go downstairs and get on a ladder with a building inspector and go up through the ceiling tiles and see if the floor is going to hold that kind of weight before you go building on it. So what you're doing is you're standing under the foundation to get understanding. That's where the word comes from. So if you haven't gone below the surface on everything, then you don't understand what's going on. So you need to realize that all the things that we see every day, the words and terms that we use, why do you have police? You have police because, well, that's a whole different story. I could get into that when we get into government and how America was founded. But it's just an extraordinary, fascinating world of words and terms. Why do you go to court? You play basketball and tennis on a court. Yeah, so, and how do you play tennis on a court? You play with a racket. Come on. So when you understand the words and terms and the catchphrases that the professional people use in these different disciplines, you begin to see how all of this is a manipulation of words. And put an S in front of the word word, and it becomes sword, because words can kill you. You know, when you go into a court, the whole idea in a court is to put the ball back in the other guy's court. So you've got one team, a team of lawyers, and that team picks the ball up and throws the ball back in their court. Now that team picks the ball back up and throws it in your court. And so the whole idea, it's a game. It's commerce. It's business. And the judge is ruling from the bench. The word bench is a bank in Latin. So therefore the judge is ruling from the bench. That's why he gives you a bench warrant. If you don't show up in court, you get a bench warrant. Bench means bank. The law doesn't care about you. The bank cares about you. You know, you were going to pay a lot of money in fines, and they were going to make a lot of money off of you, and you didn't show up, so they issue a bench warrant. And again, you need to realize that courts are nothing more than a commercial endeavor. And why do you have a fence and a gate in a courtroom? And people go in and sit down, but there's a fence and a gate. What does that mean? Well, the gate is a water gate, because the idea being is that the people who sit out here on this side are under the law of the land. We've heard that term, law of the land. Yeah, people live on land. However, once you walk through the gate, you're now in hot water, because inside the gate is maritime admiralty. Inside the gate is rule. The rule now is not on the land. Now you're in water, because that's all there is just land and water on the earth. So once you're in a courtroom and you walk through and you put your hand, when they call your name, and you put your hand on the gate and open the gate, that piece of wood across the gate that you opened up is called a bar. And you're not licensed to pass the bar. So that's why when you open the gate, it's called a floodgate. You are now in territory of water. And so now you're in hot water, and someone's going to have to bail you out. And because you're 90% water, if somebody can't bail you out, they're going to put you in a cell, because you're a biological, electrical, water, maritime admiralty product. They're going to put you in a cell. Let me better go back and explain that you are a corporation. And there's two ways of explaining this. You are a business. And that's why I don't want you putting your nose into my business, right? It's because you are, in fact, by law, a business, a corporation. That's why when you die, you're a corpse, because you were a corporation. Now you're defunct. You're out of business. But how do you tell? See, there's two of you. My goodness, I don't even know where to start on this. Look at, you ask anybody, how many states are in our federal union, in our union in this country? And people will tell you there's 50 states. There is not 50 states. There's 100 states in our union, because there are 2 states in every state. First of all, say in California, you have California State. California State is California. But the word state of California is not California. State of is a word that's used in maritime law to denote the federal government operating inside of California. So state of is federal. So you have Cal State Northridge, Cal State Long Beach, Cal State. Cal State is the state, but state of California is federal. So now you need to know when you go into court to play the game, whether you're going to be you're going to need a lawyer or an attorney, because they don't mean necessarily the same thing, because the words and terms and how this stuff really works. And the judge in a courtroom, I forgot to mention, the judge he rules from the bench, as I said, which is a bank, but the judge wears a black robe. Why does he wear a black robe? Black robes are a very important symbol. It means something to people who know. And this is why, when kids graduating from school, college, or high school, wear black robes. Darth Vader wears a black robe. Dracula wears a black robe. Black robes represent something very important. It represents the planet Saturn. The planet Saturn is referred to in the ancient world as Lord of the Rings. We're still making movies in Hollywood, Lord of the Rings, which is the planet Saturn, Lord of the Rings. And the ancient people were told to listen to their gods, so women would wear an ear ring. Men were to get married before their god, so they wear a wedding ring. Get it? Lord of the Rings, Saturn. And
how many people even know they're worshiping Saturn today?
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And so the Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew, and the Hebrew people, they celebrate something called Sabbath, which is a holy day, which is Friday evening to Saturday evening, because they count their days from evening to evening. Why? There's a reason for that too. Very simple, but it has to do with moon worship. I'll get into that later. But Saturn was, as I said, referred to as Lord of the Rings. And what was I saying? Where was I going to go with that? But it has to do with the use of terms and words that today people don't understand, the connections. There's so much going on in my head right now I'd like to be able to express, but there's just so much, I don't even know where to begin with this stuff. The way the government is set up today, well, let's see, where would we start to make sense on this? First of all, if you say that you are a U.S. citizen, what you think, like if you go to a bank or go into any big corporation or whatever and fill out an application and they ask you, are you a U.S. citizen? And you say yes. What you think that they're asking you on the application is, are you lawfully in America to do business here? That's not what they ask you. Any good attorney would say, I didn't ask you that. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm asking you, are you saying of your own volition, out of your own mouth, are you testifying that you are a U.S. citizen? And you think, well, of course I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm perfectly free, this is my country. I'm a U.S. citizen. No, that has nothing to do with you being lawfully in America. U.S. citizen means that you are an employee of a foreign corporation, which was incorporated in Delaware back in 1871. It's a privately owned company. There was a company after the Civil War was incorporated in Delaware. And right about 1868, 69, 70, and then 71. So there was a privately owned company incorporated. Well, anybody can incorporate a company, anybody. But you have to have a president of the corporation, a vice president, and a secretary treasurer. And so there was a group of men got together and formed a corporation called the United States Corporation. And basically in that corporation, anyone who works for that corporation would be called a citizen. So it's called a U.S. corporation. It's a privately owned company. And so what you are saying, if you say you're a U.S. citizen, is you're saying that you are an employee of a foreign corporation, because the corporation is not in California, it's in Washington, D.C. And so that's the corporate headquarters. And so, but you are working for them. So you are an employee of a foreign corporation. And therefore, you are a corporation. You are a franchisee, I think the word is, franchisee. So it's like if you open up a McDonald's here, you are not McDonald's. You're merely a franchise. You're merely one of the McDonald's. And so the idea being is that the corporation, privately owned company in Washington, D.C., it's a corporation. It has a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and you are an employee of that corporation. So therefore, in California, if you're living here and making money here in California, you are a franchisee of a foreign corporation, and you're working here making money in California. If you go back to the 1849 Constitution of California, 1849 Constitution of California says that California will never, ever have a state tax. So there is no such a thing as legally, unlawfully, as a state tax in California. We don't have one. But if you are a U.S. citizen, which means you're an employee of a privately owned company called United States Corporation, incorporated in 1871, then you are a franchisee of a foreign corporation. Therefore, you don't pay the California state tax, you pay the California Franchise Tax Board, because you're a franchisee of a foreign corporation. California has no state tax. First of all, it's a very dangerous subject to talk about in public, because there are ways to do it, but you have to understand what you've gotten yourself into. Let me explain something first before we get into how to get out of it. All ships, everything is based on maritime admiralty. Everything is based on the law of water, because there's only land and water on the earth. So the land, as I said, in a court, the people are on this side are under the law of the land, because they live on land. But inside, where the judge sits, is water. Okay, it's maritime admiralty, the water. And one of the words, a word that is used in the ancient world for the sea was mer, M-E-R, which gives us mermaid. And so we say that the water, the waves are enchanting. So it gives us the word merchant. And so the merchant it's like music to his ears, the money coming in, you know? And so it's a merchant. And so how do you get in to do music, to do business with the merchant? Is you go through the front door. It's called an entrance. No, entranced into, you get entranced to go into to do business with the merchant. You need to understand that everything is basically in law based on water. Now, when all ships, and I'm giving this preface to answer your question later, all ships, rocket ship, sailing ship, I don't care what kind of ship it is, all ships are female by law. You always have captains saying that, oh, she's a wonderful ship, or she's a seaworthy ship. All ships are female. And so when a ship pulls into harbor, it parks at the dock. And where it parks at the dock is called its berth, B-E-R-T-H. She is sitting in her berth. And so she ties off at the dock. And so every piece that comes off that ship, say for instance $800 million worth of Toyotas coming off that ship, every single item coming off that ship has to have its own certificate of manifest. It's called a certificate of manifest. As they bring the car off, does it have 4 doors or 2? The air conditioning, what color is it? And so every ship has to have its own paperwork. It's called a certificate, because she has brought she's brought the product in. Women produce the product. And so when she's sitting in her berth, and every item coming out of her has to have a certificate, that's why when your mother gave birth, she was in labor, and she gave birth, and so you have to have a birth certificate. And so the birth certificate's got to be signed by the dock, because that's where the ship is sitting, by the dock. So, and of course, if you're taking off one of those cars and it falls down and crashes, or a TV falls and breaks, that's all right. It was stillborn. You didn't get to make any money off of it. And that's okay. Those things happen. But you have to have a doctor sign the death certificate. So the doc has to sign your certificate. And once you understand that banks run the court, and all banks pretty much are backed up by the real powers of a bank is basically insurance companies. Insurance companies are the brains and the power behind the bank. That goes back to the corporation again. So today, you are not free. In New York, they have something called the Statue of Liberty. It's not the Statue of Freedom. Liberty is what a sailor gets when he comes into port. You get liberty, not freedom. You can't just decide to walk off the ship. No. You talk to the captain. Why is it captain? Because the captain occupies the position by law as God. I don't know if you know that or not. But all captains of ships have the position under maritime law as deity. They're like God. That's the law. So a captain on a ship can do whatever he wants. If he doesn't like you, he can put you in and lock you up until you get back to port, because he's God. Once he's in that ship, he is the law. And so why we call him a captain? Because he represents capital. Capital is the money. If you don't have the capital, you can't do anything. So it's really an interesting story about how words are used to manipulate, exploit people. And so, as I said, when she gives birth to you, you have to have a birth certificate, because that's why all your vital signs are on that certificate. What color was it? How much does he weigh? Did he have two hands? And so, because why? Because you are a product. She produced you. And so the product becomes a commercial thing to be bought and sold. And here's what's very interesting. Your body, your physical body, is a security on the New York Stock Exchange. Let me show you something. And when you take out your Social Security card, and on the back of your Social Security card, and I have one here, I think, here it is. On your back of your Social Security card, if you go to work for a corporation, say like General Motors or Ford Motor Company or some Sears, some big corporation, you normally have a name tag that says that you are lawfully employed by this corporation. And so the Social Security number is your number in the corporation called United States Corporation. This is your tag number. All right. However, on the back of the Social Security card is a set of numbers. On the very back of your Social Security card, on the bottom, these numbers are in red. They don't have to be in red, but often they are. These numbers represent your physical flesh and blood body. That's what's in red. It represents your body on the New York Stock Exchange. Because your body, your physical body, is being bought and sold on the stock exchange. So that's why if you take money, you take the dollar bill, you will see a series of numbers, the serial numbers. And if you take the back of your Social Security card and put it above those numbers, you will see they're matching. So the idea being is that the back of the Social Security card is your body on the New York Stock Exchange, which is backing up the currency in America. And so that's why, there's a whole story about how you are a commodity on the stock exchange. Incidentally, you are worth, from what I've gathered from hearing the people who know, they're saying that your body is worth something like $6 million on the New York Stock Exchange. And that's interesting, because if that be true, which I think it is, that means that you're worth $6 million right now yourself. There's so much that you need to understand about how the corporation works. So how do you get freedom? Well, for one thing, first of all, you have to understand that you are not free. If you're a U.S. citizen, you are an employee of a foreign corporation, and they own your body. Therefore, to get away from that, you have to get out of the system. And the laws have changed now because 9/11, as far as I'm concerned, my opinion, and I've only been looking at it for 53 years, but my opinion is 9/11 was a setup job in order for the government to be able to do certain things that the people would never allow. The symbols on the dollar bill, that tells you a lot too.
Ooh, this will be good.
Yeah, I mean, I started talking about this a long time ago, 45 years ago. Incidentally, when you were saying that I have been influencing the liberty movement, the freedom movement, I really have never been a party to any movement at all, ever. I've never joined any organization, and I was doing what I'm doing 53 years ago, back in 1959, 60, 61. I was going around town giving lectures on secret societies, who prints the money, national coats of arms, heraldry, national treasure kind of things. Who wrote the Constitution? Where did it come from? And so I've been doing this stuff for many, many years. And obviously at the time I was doing it, nobody knew what I was talking about. But the basic story I've been trying to get out for all my life is that nothing in this world works the way you think it does. Nothing. The U.S. government is not what you think it is. It's a corporation. It's a company. It's like Baskin and Robbins. It's like a Target. It's a corporation. It's a company. So are you. You're a corporation. And so how do you tell the difference because there are two of you? As I said, there are two states in every state. Well, there's two of you. There's the one that God created, the one that your parents gave to the world, but there's also the legal you. Now, understand this. There is no law on this earth, not federal, state, county, city, nothing. No law in the world applies to your physical flesh and blood body. The reason why, the logic was in the ancient world, and especially in the Middle Ages, was all the kings realized that nobody can control you. Even your mother can't control you. When you were a baby, she had no control over you. And nobody knows what's going on in your head from one day to the next, so nobody can control you. But the kings wanted to be able to have control. So how did they do it? They're very simple. They created another you. And so they created a document. And the document says that the document has your name, your address, and everything on it, which is you. Then they ask you, would you sign this, agreeing that your body is represented by this thing I created? I'm the government, and I created a document, and it has the same name as you. So would you agree that this document represents you? Please sign it.
Oh, I would never do that. You
Well,
have to be a fool.
Well, once you sign it, I own you. Because I own this. I own the paper. And you said that the paper represents you. So now I can do anything I want to the paper. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know. I don't have any control over you, but I do have control over the paper. And that paper is the birth certificate and the Social Security card, which represents you. And so it's a government entity that they can control, and you signed and agreed to it. And that's why on your birth certificate, if you look on the bottom of your birth certificate where your parents signed it, where your mother or father signed it, it doesn't say parent, it says informant. So your parents were informing the corporation that we got a new TV set that just came in. We got a new Toyota that's just come, and now the corporation can make money off of it. Incidentally, see, the corporation owns your body, and it makes money off of you, and it's selling you and buying and selling you on the stock market. Well, if you come into this country, say from Mexico illegally, the corporation called United States can put a lien on you. It's called a mechanic's lien. You know, if you pay a painter to paint your house and you don't pay him, he could go down for a few bucks and put a lien on the property, which means that you can't do anything with your home until you pay him. He has a lien on the property, okay? So therefore, if you come into this country and you're undocumented, they don't care if you're illegal, you're undocumented, because your body can be bought and sold if it's documented. But if we don't know you're here, then if they catch you, they will put a lien on you. And so then you become known as an alien. No, you're not an alien. They have put a lien on you. And so the corporation called United States looks at you as a lien. Alien. So when you look at the money, our dollar bill, of course you'll see on the what am I trying to say? The symbol for is called the Great Seal. The Great Seal is the eagle. And the eagle represents, in all ancient cultures, the eagle always represented the sun. So the eagle has two wings, left wing and right wing.
Different number of feathers?
Different number of feathers, yes. But that's why we only have two political parties. We have a left wing and right wing. Why? Because the eagle only has two wings, a left wing and a right wing, okay? We have something in Washington called the Council of Nine. That's why I have the bottom line. The bottom feathers are nine. They're nine feathers. look at the 13 stars on the dollar bill and tell me what they make up together, the configuration of all 13 stars.
They make up the Seal of Solomon or the Star of David.
That's exactly right, the Star of David. Because the Star of David is actually a new term for that. This is a hexagram. Hexagrams have been around for 10,000 years. Hexagrams are a very, very old ancient symbol that's been used by the Hindus, the Buddhists. All the ancient peoples of the world have used a hexagram, a six-pointed star. The old Babylonians would draw a circle around on the ground and draw a triangle inside the circle. Then put a second triangle inside the circle, which makes a Star of David, or the six-pointed star. Then they'd step inside and cast a spell on you. And that's what we call putting hex on you. They put the hex on you. And so the hex is a six-pointed star. And so, and originally the six-pointed Star of David was referred to, and look it up in encyclopedias and reference works on occult symbols. It will tell you that the star, six-pointed star, or the hexagram, was a symbol for the planet Saturn. It's an old ancient astronomical symbol for the planet Saturn, which I think is interesting because the Hebrews are worshiping the planet Saturn, Lord of the Rings. And that's why Saturn in the old, now I'm getting into religion, but in the ancient world, the planet Saturn in the old ancient Phoenician language was called Shabbath, S-H-A-B-B-A-T-H. Shabbath was the planet Saturn in the Phoenician language. So today, the Hebrews who are still keeping holy the worship of Saturn, they call it Shabbath or Sabbath. And so the Sabbath is actually showing respect for the ancient Hebrew god Saturn, Lord of the Rings. Because that's what Shabbath was, the name for the planet Saturn.
And now we have Saturday.
Yeah, now we have Saturn Day. And why is it that the Hebrew people and others around the world too have their holy days after sundown? That has to do with the time of Moses. Because even in the Bible, in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis, it says that when God was creating the world, he started off with the evening and the morning of the first day, the evening and the morning of the second day. Always, God even started off with doing things in the evening and then goes to the next day. So that's why the Hebrews today celebrate all their holy days after sundown. Why? Because during the time of in history that Moses would have been around, Moses was the leader of a lunar cult. It was a time in which the Hebrew people, or those ancient people we call the Hebrews, were worshippers of the moon. Because if you've ever been to the Middle East, and especially into Egypt, looking across east from Egypt is the Sinai. And in the Sinai, there are high mountain ranges in the Sinai. And at night, from Egypt's side and from the Egyptian side, you will see the moon come up. And so the ancient peoples, very ancient peoples, believed that the moon lived in the mountain. And he was referred to by the Arabs as the old man of the mountain, because at night he comes up out of the mountain. And so the moon god lived in the mountain. The moon god was called Sin. Look it up in a dictionary, S-I-N. Sin was the name of a god of the moon in the Arabic world. And the word Ai was a mountain. And so you put the god, which is the moon, Sin, with his mountain, Ai, put it together, it becomes Sinai. Sin Ai. So this old, very holy Sinai. No, it's Sin Ai, the mountain of the moon god. And when does the moon god come out? Well, he's not coming out when God's sun, the light of the world. Christianity is worshiping God's sun, the light of the world. Of course the sun is the light of the world. What else lights the world if it isn't the sun? And so the Christians are worshiping the sun god, while the ancient Hebrews were worshiping the moon god. And he don't come out till after 6. So he comes out after sundown. So that's why they started all their days after sundown, because they were the worshipers of the moon god. And Moses was not a Hebrew name. Moses was an Egyptian term. It meant something. Moses simply means the son of. Like in Hebrew, bar meant, or ben and bar in Hebrew means the son of. So that's why you have Judah ben-Hur, for instance. Ben-Hur What is H-U-R, and where does that H-U-R come from? It comes from Horus. Judah, the tribe of Judah, was the worshippers of Horus when they were in Egypt. Well, because the Egyptians were worshippers of the sun god. My goodness, it's just all kinds of interesting stuff about words and terms and how the religion started. Well, anyway, so of course on the back, on the reverse of the Great Seal, of course, you'll see the pyramid. Very few people have ever questioned, why do you have an Egyptian pyramid on a dollar bill? And why is the eye at the top? And what does that mean? And the words in Latin, most people are trying to earn a buck, they're not even looking at it. But if you look at the back of the dollar bill, it says annuit coeptus. And on the bottom, below the pyramid, it says novus ordo seclorum.
New order of
New
the
order
ages.
of the world, the New World Order. And the annuit coeptus over the top simply means our enterprise is successful, or our enterprise has been crowned with success. And so what enterprise? The New World Order. The New World Order, the pyramid has 13 layers. Just as the 13 stars, there are 13 feathers, there are 13 stripes, and the shield. You'll see the American shield. That's what is called an American flag. The American flag, the stripes are going up and down. A United States flag, which is a corporation, it's a privately owned company, U.S. flag, the stripes go that way. So it's interesting how people don't realize there are two kinds of flags. And so when the corporation was being founded, it was different than when the country was being founded. Because we talk about the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, a banner is a promotion for a corporation. It's not a flag. Anyway, there's a whole story about the eye. The eye, Christians say the eye is the eye of Lucifer and the eye of the devil, because they have no idea in the world what the eye really stands for. The eye on the back of a dollar bill is the symbol for the Hebrew Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, in the book of Isaiah and in the book of Psalms and other places in the Bible, Old Testament. The Messiah, not Jesus, but Hebrew Messiah, was referred to as a chief cornerstone the builders rejected. The word chief cornerstone is interesting in Hebrew. Not a cornerstone, chief cornerstone. And then in the New Testament, which is Christian, Jesus is twice referred to, once in the 1 Peter and once in the book of Revelation, where Jesus is referred to as the chief cornerstone the builders rejected. Same term that's used in the Old Testament for the original, for the Jewish Messiah. What is the word chief cornerstone? And again, Christians will tell you today Jesus is the cornerstone of the church. No. Go back and read it correctly. Jesus is the chief cornerstone. Big difference. Very big difference. Chief cornerstone, when you look up in the ancient Hebrew, means a triangle perched on top of a pyramid. A pyramid is the stone, but if you cut the top of the pyramid off, it's a perfect little pyramid itself. And that little one is called, in Hebrew, a chief cornerstone. So therefore, the Messiah is represented, for the Hebrew Messiah is represented on the dollar bill as a chief cornerstone. Now you'll see the light emanating from around it. It goes back to the idea that Jesus is the chief cornerstone. He is called God's Son, the light of the world. Interesting stuff when you get into American dollar bills and the symbolism on it. It all goes back, as I said, to corporations, business. The whole thing is business. Religion is a business. And it's a very big business. And I am always amazed and shocked to see how religion, what it has done to the human race. I have the highest of respect and the highest of admiration for spirituality. I believe in a divine spiritual presence in the world and in the universe. There's no doubt in my mind that there is a very high intelligence being expressed in the heavens. I have a highest respect for basically what you would call God, whatever that is. You're trying to understand the infinite with a finite mind. Like Manly P. Hall, my dear friend, said, If you can explain something about God so that everyone can understand, then that would prove conclusively that you don't know anything. Because your pea-sized, ignorant, ill-informed, uninformed brain cannot understand the divine complexity of the universe. And the best scientists in the world, they don't even understand it. And every 10 years, they got a whole new understanding of the universe. But I am totally convinced that there is a presence in the universe that men have called God. It's just that it's not on TV. It's not on TBN. That is a monstrosity. Christianity today is a monstrosity. But then again, most of religion is a monstrosity because it's a business. It's all based on commerce. That's why churches are divided into denominations, like 10s and 20s, right? You need to look at words. Words are very important. Now, in relation to the corporation, how to get out of it. Well, first of all, you're born into it, so the first thing you need to understand is that your birth certificate makes you because I forgot to bring this out, that I said where your parents signed the birth certificate, it doesn't say parent, it says informant. Mm-hmm. But look on the other side, and you will see the whole birth certificate it's on stationery, which is security paper. It's on bank security paper. It's got the little security design all around it. So it's a security on the stock exchange. But on the bottom, on the left-hand side, on the bottom, it's printed. It will tell you that this birth certificate is the property of the Department of Commerce. Why? Because you are a commercial product. Your mother gave birth to you. She was in labor. She built you in labor, and then you came out of your mother's water, so you're a maritime admiralty product, just like the TV that came from Japan came in on water. That's why if you're going to be born again, you have to go out and be dumped into the water and be born again, because you came out of your mother's water.
So how exactly do I shred the birth certificate?
There are two ways of doing it. The first way is going to be very, very difficult anymore, because the government realized the people were catching on to the trick of how this stuff works. And there seemed to be a growing movement out there in the world of finding out how we've been had. And there's a lot of intelligent people out there starting to ask questions. And so the government immediately realized they're going to have to do something to close the door on this, lock it down quick, before these kids start reading too much and learning too much. And now we're going to have a problem, because now they're talking and they're learning how we did this, and they're learning the tricks and the secret of how we control them. So we better do something quick. And so therefore now they are able to enforce new laws that say if you even open your mouth, you're going to prison. And if we catch you even thinking the wrong German thoughts in Berlin, we catch you thinking or saying anything, you're scaring me. You know, I'm your master and I own your body on the stock market. And if you start talking about freedom, that scares me. And therefore, basically, I'm terrorized. Therefore, you are a terrorist. Now I can arrest you as a terrorist. Why? Because you're talking too much. It's a trick. The whole entire world is a business. And the more I learn about this, the more you see how this stuff really works. It's extraordinarily scary stuff. So it's very difficult to get out of the system, and I'm not sure you want to. There is a way to get out. There's actually a fairly easy way to get out from the system. But here's the problem. When you opt out of the federal system, you don't want to be a federal employee anymore, you can become a state citizen. This is what was going on before and during the Civil War. Before the Civil War and during the Civil War, people in America were called state citizens. And the way the country was set up back in 1776, every man, woman, and child in this country was considered a sovereign, meaning you had the same power in you, as an American, you had the same power of a king of England. You were a sovereign. That's why in the cowboy movies, you've seen how many movies, the John Wayne cowboy movies, well, the cowboys are riding into town with guns. They didn't have to have a permit. Ask those guys coming in off the prairie with their guns, do you have a permit? They'll take a permit, come out in the street, I'll show you my permit. Why? Because cowboys could wear guns. Why? Because you're a sovereign. Under maritime admiralty law, the way the country was founded, you're a sovereign. Sovereign means you're a king. And a king has a right to arm himself. The King of England has a right to have an army. What are you going to do about it? And so one day, if the King of Spain wakes up and decides he doesn't like the King of France, and he's going to declare war on the King of France, well, that's the same thing in a bar and a cowboy. One king, he's a sovereign. He's got guns. He's got his own guns, and he's legal. He's lawful. And he's decided he doesn't like you. And you're another king. So now you got two kings, and they've got and now they've got a bad situation here. Well, go out in the street and solve it. Why? Because that's like the movie High Noon. Cowboys could go out in the street in America in front of the sheriff and draw on each other. Why? Because the law says that you were a sovereign. And as a sovereign means you're a king. You can do whatever you want, but you're going to pay for it, because if you're carrying a gun, well, so is he. And so if you're going to go out in the street with a gun, just know this is serious. One of you is not going home tonight, right? And so that was the way America was founded. Well, after the Civil War, around 1848, a group of men in Europe, in England, got together. The group was called the League of Just Men. The League of Just Men. And they wrote a manifesto for a new kind of government in Europe. But this was in 1848 in America. But in Europe, there was a League of Just Men, and they were writing up a new plan for a new kind of world government. And so the League of Just Men wrote up a document, and then they picked somebody to put their name on it because they didn't want anyone to know who wrote it. So they picked a guy named Karl Marx. Karl Marx did not write the Communist Manifesto. It was written by a handful of men called the League of Just Men, and they put Karl Marx's name on it. But he didn't write the Communist Manifesto. It's like evolution. Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin did not write Origin of the Species. He didn't write anything about evolution. Charles Darwin never wrote anything about evolution. And today everybody, Charles Darwin, evolution. Charles Darwin never wrote anything, period, about evolution. Go back and do your homework. You'll find out that Charles Darwin's family financed a man named Wallace. The guy's last name was Wallace. I don't remember his first name. And Wallace was the guy who was traveling around in the Caribbean, and he was studying all the animals and the reproduction of animals, and he was writing. But Charles Darwin's family was financing him because they were very interested in his work. So they were financing this guy named Wallace. And so Wallace was writing all these notes about his ideas and thinking about evolution of animals, etc. And then he got very sick toward the end of his life and wrote a letter to Darwin's family and said he was very sick and he may not make it. So, you need to come and help me and get all this stuff out of here if I die. So Charles Darwin came over and got all of Wallace's books and papers and everything. And then when Wallace died, Charles Darwin figured, my family financed the whole thing. I'll put my name on it, become a big movie star. So Charles Darwin puts his name on book that becomes known as he's the father of evolution. He's not the father of anything. He's just a ripoff. All his family was just financing Wallace. So when you understand how these things that we're being told, we're being lied to every day. I mean, the Marlboro man dies of lung cancer. Nobody knows, But to go back to the idea that there was a time when you could become a state citizen. And if you're a state citizen, that means you're not in the federal system, because a federal was referred to as a U.S. citizen. But no, if you were born in Colorado, you could say, I'm a Colorado citizen, not a U.S. citizen. And so you can do the same thing today. You can become a state citizen today in America. And once you do, you're out of the federal system completely. And the federal government no longer has any jurisdiction over you at all, period. Oh yeah, you would be allowed to do anything.
Ignore building codes.
No more building codes, none of it, because you are completely out from under the federal jurisdiction. And that's the name of the tune. Any cop will tell you, jurisdiction. I mean, if you have a wife and your baby and your kid is in my house and he's acting up, I can't discipline him. Why? Jurisdiction. He's not mine, he's yours. If anybody's going to do anything, you, not me, because I don't have jurisdiction. Well, that's the way the government works. If you're a state citizen, the federal government does not have jurisdiction, and they know it. So they just leave you alone, because they can't touch you. First of all, understand that if you're a U.S. citizen, you do not own anything. If you paid your house off, you don't own it. You have an equitable interest in the property, but you don't own it. Only way you can own anything in America, and actually own it, is with something called allodial title. A-L-L-O-D-I-A-L. Allodial, I think that's the way it's spelled. A-L-L-O-D-I-A-L. Allodial title. Allodial title means God cannot touch it. No one. Because it's absolute owned by you. But if you don't buy your car, your jet plane, your boat, your house, whatever it is, and have an allodial title, then you don't own it. And the authorities can come in and take your home anytime they want. It's interesting. Banks cannot touch anything that has an allodial title, cannot touch it. Government cannot touch it. No one can touch anything that is bought under a allodial title. Go look it up in a dictionary. Look it up in a law dictionary. Allodial title. Very interesting. The Queen of England, everything she owns is an allodial title. Means God can't touch it. Yeah. So, and Americans can buy stuff in allodial title. You just have to know how to do it.
And what is the exact connection between the Queen, the House of Windsor, and the Catholic Church, and that whole, how do those institutions?
Well, the Vatican, if you remember that for at least 2,300 years, Rome, starting with the Caesars of Rome, the Augustus Caesar, the first emperor, but for 2,300 years, Europe has been dominated by Rome. And then for in the last 1,600 years has been under the Catholic Church. The Holy Father is the Pontifex Maximus, which was a term given to the Caesars. Pontifex Maximus means the greatest bridge builder. And so, again, Rome has dominated Europe for 2,300 years, under the Roman Empire and then under the Vatican. And for 2,300 years, Europe has dominated the planet. So therefore, all roads lead to Rome. And so that's why, again, when we were talking about the Jewish thing, the Jews are not doing anything near whatever's going on out there. Don't worry about the Jews. You better look at the Vatican. For 2,300 years, Rome has ruled Europe, and Europe has dominated the world. There's where the power is. The Holy Father, nothing holy in Rome. He represents God. That's why all of the royalty will tell you that they have a divine right. What do you mean divine right? That implies God put you there. No, divine right comes from the idea that the Pope anointed you. The Pope said you could be prince, so now you have a divine right. Why? Because he represents God. You say, what God? Because that Pope's tiara he wears is a fish head. The Roman Catholic Church is worshiping an old god named Dagon, D-A-G-O-N, Dagon. Dagon is the god of the Roman Catholic Church. But happily, most people have no idea who Dagon was. I have no idea what I'm talking about. So everything is fine until you wake up one day and start doing your homework and find out that the Roman god Dagon is the god of the Roman Catholic Church today. That's a real story. D-A-G-O-N. Go do some homework on it. Yeah. Project Bluebeam, it all has to do with the presence, extraterrestrial presence. All of these little projects like this, Project Blue Book and all this has to do with UFO alien presence. And I am telling you, there's no doubt in my mind at all that there is an extraterrestrial or alien presence on the earth today. There's no doubt in my mind about it. I've seen too many things with my own eyes. I've heard way too many stories from important people from all over the world. I've traveled around the earth, and I've heard way too many stories from very important people, very well-grounded, highly intelligent people, professionals, who tell me on one-on-one, stories about their one-on-one encounters with aliens. So I have to assume that there's too much smoke not to be a fire. And I'm telling you, there are aliens right now here in this city. I think we are the result. I have often said that the word that is used is incorrect. We talk about evolution. Evolution is not the subject you need to know about. Evolution is not important. What is important is intervention. Well, if you go back to the Bible and I believe that both the Old and New Testament is an encoded story. That's a whole different subject, but I believe that the Old and New Testament, especially the New Testament, is an encoded metaphor. It's encoded telling you something real important, but you walk right past it. That's why the Bible has Jesus saying, you look with your eyes, but do not see. You listen with your ears, but you don't hear. And with the heart, you don't get the sense of it. In other words, go back and read it. It doesn't say what you think it said. And so when God, which is actually Elohim in the plural, and God said, come, let us make man in our image after our likeness. That's in Genesis. Rabbi Marvin Entelman, many years ago, I used to sit and talk with him, and other rabbis, teachers I've sat and talked with for hours. They brought out to me, this is back in the mid-60s, that I was told nowhere in the Bible does it say that God created man. Nowhere. It does not say in the Bible anywhere that God created man. What it says in Genesis is that God created Adam, not man. And so the scripture actually says, that God said, come let us, who's us? Come let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And so Christians say, well, see, there's God creating man. And Rabbi Entelman said, no, that's not what it says. Go back and read it. It says, come let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Not make man, man's already here, but come let us make him in our image, after our likeness. And then later on it says that God says, here man has become as one of us. He knows too much. He's getting too smart. He's become as one of us. What do you mean us? Very interesting is that in Genesis 9, the first words in Genesis 9 talks about after the flood of Noah's day, when God says to Noah and his family, his wife and 3 sons and three wives, there's 8 people on board the ark, and the Bible says that God says to Noah after the flood, go forth, multiply, and replenish the earth. So I asked the rabbis, I said, is this a correct translation when it says go forth, multiply, and replenish the earth? Yes, that's correct. And I said, well, then that means do it again, because means do it again. Yes, that's correct. Obviously, and one rabbi said to me, well, obviously, if God has destroyed all of mankind with a great flood, and if you want to have people on the earth, you're going to have to replenish the earth. Not plenish, replenish, do it again. And I said, okay, that makes sense. But what about in Genesis 1:28, when God is creating Adam, and he says to Adam and Eve, go forth, multiply, and replenish the earth. The word is replenish. And I said, why? I thought that this is the first man and woman. And the rabbi said, no, it was not the first man and woman. He's telling the Adam to replenish the earth, do it again. And that's why, and we got into this conversation, because in Genesis 1:1 it says, in the beginning, the gods created the heavens and the earth. But very interesting, in Genesis 1:2 says, and the earth was without form and void. And the rabbis will tell you, what does that mean? That God creates the earth and it's without form and void? What does that mean? God created something that has no form and is void. No, it's a mistranslation. The English were great with the King's English, but they didn't know that much about Hebrew. Now we know better about the Hebrew language, and so the word in the Genesis 1:2 was tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu is translated, mistranslated, and was without form and void. No, go back and read it correctly. Genesis 1:2 actually says, using the term tohu vavohu, is and the earth became a waste and a desolation. Not was without form and void. That means nothing. Became a waste and a desolation. And it's interesting that in Jeremiah, the 4th chapter in Jeremiah, I think it's Jeremiah 4, where the prophet Jeremiah says, I was sleeping on my bed and God gave me a vision of the earth. And the earth was filled with beautiful animals and beautiful cities. And there were great structures, but there was no man on the earth. And I said, wait a minute. The earth is filled with beautiful structures and beautiful animals, but there was no man on the earth? That's right. So it says in Jeremiah. Well, then who the hell was here then if it wasn't man? And it says that, but it was the meeting place of the gods, the meeting place of the Elohim. And so, and then it goes on to say in Jeremiah 4, I saw the earth when it was a beautiful meeting place with beautiful cities, but there was no man. And then Jeremiah says, and then I saw tohu vavohu, same word that was used in Genesis 1:2. I saw the earth and it became a waste and a desolation. So what the scripture is actually saying is that the earth was a beautiful paradise of some kind of an incredibly gorgeous and beautiful paradise on the earth many, many hundreds of millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, who knows. But it became a waste and a desolation, which implies that there must have been some kind of a Star Wars. Some kind of a war began on earth, and we're now seeing all the repercussions of that all around the world. I think that there is a war going on now for the very life and soul of the human creature. We are, we have been created by someone, and whoever came here, like the Bible says, come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Well, that means that we look like our Creator. Well, that makes sense because in Genesis 18, when the Scripture talks about in the Old Testament about Abraham and Sarah, and the Scripture says that Abraham and Sarah were at their tent, and 3 men come walking up into their camp, and Abraham went out and bowed down on the ground and said, "What is my Lord saying to his servant?" So he's bowing down to somebody very powerful. Well, it's just 3 men. And then he says that, and then the Bible says that the 3 men said that they were on their way to take care of some business, and they didn't have time to stop. And it says Abraham insisted that these 3 men stop at least and have dinner, and then they could go. And so the Scripture says, the spokesman for the 3 said, "All right, but make it quick. We're busy." And so it says that Sarah fixed dinner for these 3 men, and then after dinner, 2 of them got up and left, and the one stayed there. And the one that stayed to talk for a while with Abraham was the Lord, in capital letters in the Bible. Maritime Admiralty. The capital letters means the Lord, not a Lord, the Lord. So it was the Creator, the Saraswati River. She was the giver of life. All her life came out of the Saraswati. And so the Brahmins were connected to their holy river, Sarah, so it's Abraham and Isaac, Abraham and Sarah. I'm just saying religion, politics, commerce, it's all part and parcel of a thing that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And nothing happens by chance anymore. You need to understand the world is not what you think it is. 99% of what you think is true is not. Americans are the most well-informed people in the world. The only problem is 99% of what they believe is not true. I think it was Julian Huxley. It was Julian Huxley, the father of Aldous Huxley, the British, the very famous British family, the Huxleys. Julian Huxley wrote in his, he wrote the forewords to 1984. The book 1984, well, Julian Huxley wrote the forewords. And it was a very powerful statement he made in there. I don't remember exactly, but paraphrasing, he said that all kinds of entertainment will be provided for the people so that slowly but surely their rights and their freedoms can be taken away, slowly but surely, under a continual operation of little by little, taking their freedoms away, taking their options away, and then taking their mind away. And eventually, one day, he said, in his introduction to 1984, he said, and one day the entire world will wake up and they will be locked into a cage where they cannot get out because they will have no knowledge, they will be too drunk with their alcohol, they will be too ignorant, ill-informed, and unread, they don't know how to think, and we'll have them. And I thought, well, man, that's sinister thinking. That's really, really evil thinking. Because when you look at people today, how they're mistreated, and when I drive by and see children on the street, and I think, you know, these little kids have no idea in the world, and the parents, they're so ignorant, they don't know. They have no idea. They just, you know, they don't know what's coming. They have no idea what's coming in America, and you don't want to know. What's going on, and what's going to be happening in America, you don't want to know. It's bad, it's coming. Understand this, that when the United States of America was founded in 1776, that's why you have fireworks on the 4th of July. I've asked people, why do we have fireworks on the 4th of July? I don't know, it's to celebrate. No, it's not. It's not to celebrate. It's because America was founded with fireworks. There was a revolution. There was killing in the streets. There was a revolution. And there was fireworks, cannons, you know. And so that's how the country was founded, on a violent revolution that said to England, we've had enough of this. And so you need to understand this point, that when this country was founded, the King of England saw himself as a very powerful king in Europe. But when America was founded, they defeated the British, and the British went back home with their butts bleeding all over Europe, like in the movie Goodfellas. When the kid said something to Joe Pesci, and De Niro said, you going to let him get away with that? Remember in the movie? You going to let him talk to you like that? He's just a kid, and he's talking to you like this? Well, that's what happened in Europe. The royalty, all the royalty, the bankers, the international bankers, and all those that corrupt, evil, criminal gangs in Europe that have been burning people at the stake and murdering people with the church, they looked at the King of England and said, are you going to let these people get away with this? What's wrong with you? I thought you were supposedly a very important king, and everyone's supposed to be frightened of you, and now we turn around and find out some little bunch of ragtag goofballs over there, you know, whipped your ass and made you look like a fool. Are you going to let them get away with this? And so what the king decided to do was not do anything, leave the Americans alone, because they're crazy. They're drinking and they got guns, so leave them alone. Let it die down. Let it all die down. And like Mel Gibson said in the movie Patriot, the military guy on the English side said to his other guy, he said, leave these people alone, because after the war is over, we're going to do commerce with them. That's in the movie. We're going to do commerce. We're going to deal with them in such a way. Now, they beat us. Okay, they founded their country, and we withdraw, but we're coming back. So I always say it's like you beating up some guy in a gang at night, and everybody patting you on the back because you're a big shot. You beat this guy up. It ain't over yet, son. It's just started. They're coming back for you. Same thing is true. When the United States, when the Americans defeated the British and sent them back home bleeding, it's not over yet. They're coming back. And they're coming back and they're going to deal with you. But they know they can't beat you right now because you're too mad, you're too drunk, and you got too many guns, so leave them alone. Well, we're going to come back and we're going to pay them back. And it's going to be payday one day. And that's what we got today. The British have come here and set up our government. They set up our finances. They've set everything up, our schools, set up all this stuff for us, and we sucked into it, and we don't know how to get out of it. Education. That's how to get out of it. Open your mind. Your mind's like a parachute. Don't work if it ain't open. The church is a very evil institution, not the people in it, but the actual corporation churches are very, very evil. One world religion should be. It's not going to be, but I would suggest that a one world religion would be a very good idea. But what would that religion be? It should be astrotheology is what it should be. But what it will turn out to be, who knows? But because the guys who are running the planet, they have their own decrepit ideas about their religion. But astrotheology, I think, should be the world religion. Because once you understand astrotheology and go back and look at where it came from and what it teaches, you will find astrotheology is the basis for all the religions in the world. But they've all misused it and misrepresented it. Astrotheology is very, very powerful story. And I've been wanting to, for years, to unveil that whole story of astrotheology. What the story in the New Testament about Jesus, the whole story on the Bible about Jesus is a metaphor. It's a symbolic metaphor. And as long as you are reading the Bible, especially the New Testament, as history, you're never going to get it. It's not history. It's a metaphor. It's a symbolic story. It's called astrotheology. It's the most important subject the world's ever known. That's why the Bible's called the greatest story ever told. It's a story. It's the greatest story ever told. Why? Because it's the oldest story. It's astrotheology. The Bible is nothing more than astrology. It's an incredible story. You ask any 5-year-old, where's God? You point out there. Oh, really? He's out there? Yeah. What do you call that out there? That's heaven. So God's out there in heaven, right? Yeah. Well, what does that mean? Is he extraterrestrial? He come from another planet? He's out there. Who created the creators? And from what I've gathered from people who write on such subjects, and people who have supposedly been in alien craft and talked to the aliens, I don't know, I wasn't there, but they say they have asked the aliens that question, and the aliens say, we're not God. We're not God at all. We're just smarter than you are. They've been evolving out there for 100 million years, and they come here. Obviously, they're smarter than you are because they understand the universe far better than you, and so to you, they look like gods. No, the same thing as you look like a god to people in New Guinea, with your televisions and your laser guns, to those poor people in the jungles. You look like a god. No, the extraterrestrials, from what I gather from hearing, they say to people, we're not God. We're just smarter than you are. We've been around 100 million years. You guys just fairly new. So we know all kinds of things. We can create creatures like you. But we're not God. That's different. That's something else is out there, and we don't have no control over that. So I have the highest of respect for spirituality, the concepts of God. But I'm too smart to know that God is not in synagogues or mosques or churches or anything else. It's between you and that divine presence in the universe. That's where the real trip is. There is no education.
Lack of education.
The lack of education. That's the biggest problem in education. There is none. Period. There ain't none. Like George Carlin says, be happy with what you got. It's not going to get any better. Remember? Did you ever hear him?
Oh, yeah. He's one of my heroes.
Sensational. Yeah, just be happy with what you got. And they just keep dropping down the scores so that you can get out of school, keep dropping it down the scores so that one day, like you said, one day you can get into MIT. You got a pencil? Yeah, come on in. You don't have to have a brain. The lack of education, that's why it's just absolutely amazing. They keep talking about we need $50 billion for the school system and we need hundreds of millions for the school. Look what the schools are turning out. By their fruits you shall know them. Look at the fruit that's coming out of the Los Angeles school system. Look at the kids. Talk to them. Talk to the kids that go to Los Angeles Unified School District. Talk to them. They don't even know they're alive. All they know is Big Top Pee Wee, a Hulkamania, and drugs and partying and drive-by shootings at night, and it's incredible. That is the output of the Los Angeles school system purposely. Understand this. When the government of the United States or the government of California state government or any governmental facility, the city of Los Angeles, when government pays a contractor to do something, you have to do exactly what you contracted to do. And you turn out the product exactly what they told you to do, because you got a contract with government and you don't mess with that, okay? So if the contract that the state of California has with the educational system in Los Angeles is turning out kids that can't even read. They don't even know how to find their way out of a paper bag. That's because they're supposed to be turned out like that.
The government gets what it pays for.
Wants you to be stupid. Yeah, ball games, football, kicker ball, soccer ball, basketball, tennis ball, ping pong ball, golf ball. Go play ball. Get out of here. That's what, when I was a kid, that's what my dad used to say when they had company coming over. Go play ball, kid. I said, I don't want to go play ball. I want to know what you guys are talking about. Yeah, go play ball. And so that's what we get today. If you're starting to think for yourself, you're not playing ball. You're not a team player. I don't want to be a team player. I don't want anybody owning me. I don't want anybody telling me what I can think. I'm not a team player. I want to know who you are. I want to know what gives you the right to tell me what I can and can't do. God gave me my life. You didn't give me my life. You need to wake up and find out the government is not your friend. Government simply is armed power over you. And so the idea that Americans were free, like Dick Gregory says, you're not. We talk about America being land of the free and a home of the brave. You ain't free or brave. If you were brave, you'd done something about the Federal Reserve a long time ago, and you're not free. You think you're free? I love what Dick Gregory says. You think you're free? Yeah, go out in the street and try it. Yeah, no, serious. Go out in the street and do something and tell the cops that you're free. Try it. It's very simple. People will enslave them. Look at in India, the way you break it, the way they do with elephants in India is you would tie a chain around the back leg of an elephant and chain it to a tree, and leave him there for a couple of weeks. He can only go so far. And so now you can go and take the chain off, and he will only go so far, because that's as far as he can go. He knows it. And never thought in his mind, once you take off, no, they won't go, because they know how far they can go, because the chain stops them. And so that's the way we humans are. We're told that you have to be in compliance. You have to crawl on your knees over here to the judge, all that stuff. And then you find out judges are wearing black robes because it represents the planet Saturn. Then you find out the whole court, you play basketball on a court, you play tennis on a court. How do you play tennis on a court? Play with a racket. Come on. I've seen things in government and in education, and I've seen stuff over the past 70 years that will blow your mind. So all I would say to young people listening to me, you better wake up and get a life. And understand that the powers that are over you own you. They view you as nothing more than cannon fodder. Did you see what Henry Kissinger in his book, Kiss the Boys Goodbye? Get the book. It's out in the market. Go get the book. Henry Kissinger wrote a book called Kiss the Boys Goodbye. And what he said in there is that United States military people are just a bunch of dogs. That's all they are. That's why they wear a dog tag, because they're a bunch of dogs. So who the hell cares? Nobody cares that they get killed. They're just a bunch of animals anyway. And George Bush's mother, that incredibly ugly old lady, George Bush's mother, she's scary. She's so damn ugly. She said on national television, when they were talking about how many guys were being killed in the Middle East, Americans were dying. It's a very famous quote. She was on television one morning and said, "Why should I waste my mind, my beautiful mind, on people dying? What the hell do I care? Let them die." That's the president's mother who is saying to America, we don't care about you. You are just nothing more. That's why they call you a GI. A GI is a government issue. When you go in the military, they issue your pants, your shoes, your car, your underwear, your food. They issue everything for you. So the government is issuing all the stuff for you. And so therefore it's called a government issue. Well, that's what you are. You are a GI, a government issue. Therefore, you're just like an oil can or a tire or a car or anything else the government issues. But when the war is over, the United States corporation does not go into South Vietnam or whatever after the war is over and pick up all the old cans of oil cans and the burned tires and all the Jeeps and all the trash and the junk after the war. Does the government go in and go collect all that stuff up and clean up the place after they get through with the war? No. Why? Because all the trash and garbage and trucks and tanks that are blown up, that's all a government issue. It's all junk. So as the war is over, the war is over. It's a government issue. That's why when you are a military guy in the military, and after the war is over, they'll leave you over there. You're in a concentration camp in Cambodia, they'll leave him. He's just a GI, a government issue. It's like an oil can. Who the hell cares? They got 25 oil cans over there. Who cares? Let them die. Wake up. This world is not what you think it is. I've been around for 71 years. In the last 53 years, I have spent my life in the world of the occult. The word occult is a Latin word meaning hidden. Everything that's of any importance has been hidden. The guys at the top know stuff you don't know. I made it my business to find out. And the one thing that has absolutely astounded me is how much we don't know about the world we live in. So I would say to young people watching, you better wake up and get a life and start figuring out who owns you. What is all this crap about people owning your body on this New York Stock Exchange?
So you recommend self-education for the solution?
Self-education. How did the lawyers say it in Godfather? You're taking this personal. This is just business, honey. Come on, just business. You know, you were going to get ripped off anyway. So since you were going to get ripped off anyway because you're so stupid, you're going to get, and there's a law. There's an actual Roman maxim in law. The Roman maxims in law are interesting. There's a book called Roman Maxims of Law. Interesting little quotes from the Roman law. And one of them says, "For he who would be deceived, let him." That's in Roman law, saying that if you're so profoundly stupid that you're going to buy into something and you want to be deceived, then go ahead, be deceived. Don't come to me. Don't come to me and cry about how you got took because you were stupid. I don't care. So let he who would be deceived, let him be. So that's what the government is saying. That's why that's why you wear dog tag if you're in the military, because that's all you were is a dog. I'm saying you need to wake up. You need to smell the roses and find out how this country and how this world works. Helena Blavatsky was an incredibly brilliant lady. It does not mean that I was married to her and that I loved her. It just means I'm educated enough to know the works of Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and all the other writers in that era of time. She was an extraordinary lady who traveled the world. She studied all the occult sciences. Occult simply means hidden. She studied all the occult sciences of India and Africa and religions, and she wrote extensively about religions and theology. And one of her works was called Isis Unveiled. There were two books, Isis Unveiled. One's on politics, one's on religion. The one on religion is a mind trip. All the stuff about religion that you've never heard, and the symbols in religions of different churches and all that kind of stuff. So I think she was an extraordinarily brilliant lady, very, very brave. She used to travel by herself into China and areas where men were afraid to go. She smoked cigars and would go on a train by herself. And so I admire the lady because she was a very brilliant writer, very open-minded, intelligent. She was human like everybody else, makes mistakes. But what an incredible lady. What an intelligent person. I'm fascinated with religions, with the occult, with all the things which are hidden from us. I'm fascinated with how much we don't know. And I am not quick to judge anybody. I'm smart enough to know you don't know everything. Just because somebody's telling you something you've never heard, the word is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance means that you are so incredibly brilliant, so incredibly bright and smart, that if you hear something from me that you've never heard before, obviously it must be bull. Because you're so bright, you would have heard everything in the whole world. No. You don't know everything. And so when you hear something that you don't, it sounds stupid to you, or it sounds crazy, you better back up and show respect for other people's views, because they might be telling you something that's true. In the Hebrew religion, at the end of the services in the synagogue, the rabbis will bless the congregation. It's called the benediction symbol, to bless the congregation. You know, Mr. Spock on Star Trek does that also. Mm-hmm. That's a Hebrew, that's a Jewish symbol. It's a blessing. Now, of course, the Catholic is the blessing of the making of the sign of the cross, but the Hebrew is the blessing. It's called the benediction symbol. That comes from the goat. It's the hoof of a goat, because it goes back to the Jews when they were worshiping Ares, the lamb, the ram. And this is an incredible picture. I mean, I got to find this, because it's first of all showing that he is taking care of the sheep. That's us. And but for sure he's showing the lamb's hoof. So you better check government. Always question authorities, because the word authority comes from the word author. Oh, really? Well, you know, the authorities said this. What authorities? Well, it comes from the author, the word author, meaning whoever wrote the law books. They are the authorities. And you say, wait a minute, who wrote the law books? Well, it goes back to England. Oh, really? Yeah, well, I'm an American. Why should I be ruled by England? Because you're a subject. You are a subject of the Queen in America.